Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another movie discussion. This being a, generally spoiler discussion where I talk about movies. This particular episode, as you can tell, I'm going to be talking spoilers for Thor: Love and Thunder. But like always with this situation, I'm going to start off with non-spoilers and then make it a clear distinction when I'm going to shift into spoilers. I'm going to also tell you at the top, I am going to include time codes, so you can kind of bounce around the different subjects I might cover when, discussing the movie at length that you can kind of jump around to if you're more interested in that. But starting off non-spoilers, general thoughts about the movie. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I don't know where to put this ranked against Ragnarok. I haven't really taken the time to rank my Marvel movies Yeah, I'll make a whole video talking about how I'm not the biggest into ranking stuff, but regardless, no shade against anyone who does. It's just kind of not my cup of tea. But nevertheless, I just thoroughly enjoy this movie. Just like I like the other Thor movies. I'd probably say Ragnarok is definitely my favorite of the Thor movies. But I don't know where this stands. Whether this is above Ragnarok or at the same level. I doubt it's below. It's either above or at the same level. But regardless, I thought this movie did a really good job. Very much like Ragnarok. Kind of combined that comedy while seriousness, which I know is a criticism people had against Ragnarok, which I just saw that because I was just scrolling through YouTube and I saw Double Toasted put out their review, and on the thumbnail it's oh, why is this movie so divisive, which I had no idea. I haven't looked up any reviews. I've come across people's non-spoiler reviews and stuff, but I haven't watched anything because I just watched the movie today at the time of recording. It's Monday. So I haven't watched any reviews yet. I just kind of want to get my thoughts out there, just kind of get everything kind of out of my head first, and then probably watch some stuff afterwards to kind of see in general how most people felt about it. But I know people had their criticisms. Some people had their criticisms of at least Ragnarok in the sense of they felt it was too jokey because it kind of took away from the serious mode, because it's joke, serious staying, but we never stay on it too long, which maybe some of those same criticisms are being held against this movie. Which I understand, but because I'm actually surprised at how heavy some of the stuff they handled was. Since we're still in non-spoiler territory, I won't go into specifics yet, but we'll get to it later. But there's a certain element to this story, which if you're, I'm not a comic book person, I'm not well versed, in general. But there's little things I picked up here and there about certain elements of this story that some people are wondering, oh, are they going to do that because this is what it is in the comic books? Are they going to do this? There's no way they're going to do that for a movie. And they did it. And I'm I was utterly surprised because that was a big thing. There was a big thing. People were wondering whether they were going to do storyline wise, and he did it. And I was surprised by that. But I think they did a really good job bouncing between both the drama and the comedy. I mean, because to me it fits very tonally with so many other things. There's so many things. Nothing's a full-blown just drama anymore, especially the Thor movies. But I think they struck a nice balance, because I feel that's the balance. But I mean, maybe that's just because I watch so much stuff that blends that together, comedy and drama, that they might lean more. I feel this was. Maybe it's just me. I feel it was more serious than it was comedy. But, whereas I feel maybe Ragnarok might have been maybe 60-40, 60 jokes, 40% seriousness. This, I feel the opposite, maybe. Maybe that's just me. I didn't mind Ragnarok's tone and jump between the two things. I didn't have that same criticism other people did, but I'm just saying I know that is a criticism people held against Ragnarok. But I don't know if maybe they just felt the story just kind of moved past a lot and it sit on a lot of stuff. They wish they'd taken more time, because I think, doesn't Taika put out a statement or something saying he has a 4-hour Love and Thunder cut or something like that? I don't know if that was him being serious or that was him joking. He probably legitimately does have a 4-hour cut or something like that. But either way, what we got, once again, I thoroughly enjoyed. I enjoyed the comedy. I enjoyed the action. I love the drama. I really enjoyed the steps that the story took. So I just think it's just another fun addition to not only the Thor movies, but also just a fun addition to the MCU as a whole. I loved a lot of the way they handled a lot of stuff. It's just, So obviously, just kind of throwing that out there right now. So going forward from here on, I'm going to be entering spoiler territory. So do keep that in mind. So you have been warned. Okay, so first and foremost, let's start off with Thor's story. I think it's interesting. Jumping around a little bit, I am surprised the Guardians did, because I think that some people theorized that Guardians would probably pop up at the end of the movie. Well, So I guess he's not going. I mean, I guess there's always a possibility next time we see the Guardians, which will be the holiday special. But I'm assuming the holiday special is going to take place after this, because and then Guardians 3 obviously after that. But will Thor be in that in any shape or form like at the beginning? But it's like he wasn't with the Guardians by the end of the movie, so I a lot of people have theorized he would be with them again, maybe at the end of the movie or something. Either way, obviously I love him kicking it with the Guardians, especially at a time like that's what actually got him back into shape. I did love that they kind of told his story first and foremost that so some of the stuff we saw in the trailer, like the girl, like he was kissing the blue-haired woman, like that was a past love, like his past relationships we've never dived into before. So Jane wasn't his first, but it was like his first true love. And then they broke up, and then how he compensated with losing her, losing his dad, losing his brother, losing his brother, and just losing everything. That how he compensated with that, obviously getting big in between Infinity War and Endgame, well, the 5-year time skip of the Endgame, and then now still trying to fill that void, trying to find his place in the world, trying to figure things out. So he's back in shape, kicking it with the Guardians. They go on the wild adventure, saving the day all over the place. But when he's not needed, he goes and meditates, ready for the next battle. So the Guardians call him in. He steps in and saves the day, but causes mass destruction, like he ought to do, in a very Thor fashion. And I love that he's like, oh yeah, guys, we really worked together, even though he single-handedly wiped everybody out. He's like, he came in as a heavy hitter, and it's just kind of like, oh, we're stuck doing nothing again. So I guess maybe the Guardians kind of had some animosity, because it's like, right, first and foremost, he gets gifted the screaming goats, which I love that bit. Both Mantis and Nebula wanting to shoot both of them. And he's like, oh, we're turning into meat. And they both stop screaming. He's like, meeting other people. Yeah, we definitely won't eat you guys. But him kind of moving away from the Guardians, mainly because they kind of, I think Star-Lord kind of used it as an excuse to separate the moment he found out about Sif being in trouble, which I love that whole bit of, she's like, don't worry, leave me here to die on the battlefield. Now I'll go over to Valhalla. He's like, well, technically you have to die in battle, and you'll be dying outside of battle. She's like, shit. And he's like, well, your arm will be going to Valhalla. So I was like, oh, I didn't expect, because I knew she was going to be in this, Jamie Alexander's return as Sith. I even love when Korg was like, oh yeah, and this friend, and whoever that guy is, it's like, oh, that guy got the short end of the straw. I guess, once again, it's just kind of like, oh, the justification is Sith was just, like, off-planet, so she was off doing something else, and I wonder, has she not been to New Asgard? She's probably just been out and about, looking, well, most of her friends and comrades died on the battlefield, like, her close compatriots, Thor's crew, died, to Hela's hand, so she's probably been out there the entire time looking for a battlefield to die on, but either way. But circling back to Thor, he's been trying to find a purpose, because he's just kind of been swaying in the wind, and he's kind of been using being a superhero to kind of fill that void inside of him. But I love that conversation he has with Star-Lord, where it's like, yeah, like, feeling like shit is better than feeling nothing at all, because it's that that whole typical adage, it's better to have loved than lost than never to have loved at all. And now he's kind of feeling nothing right now, and he's just using superheroism to like pass the days, but it's not filling him with anything, so he has to decide, he has to go out there and kind of find her. Well, first he's going out there to save Sith, but I also love the whole thing of Star-Lord being like, right, you look at your people you love, you look them in the eye, and look the people in the eyes that you love, and kind of know, like, kind of they're who you're fighting for, that they're the people you matter. And obviously Thor kind of sliding into place, and it's like, all right, good luck, buddy, and they bounce and leave. They didn't get too heartfelt about it. He's like, oh, I love Thor being like, yeah, you take care of the ship. He's like, oh, thanks, Thor, you're giving me back my ship. And he's like, yeah, I'm sure everyone's going to miss me. And Nebula's like, let's go. And he's like, well, except for her, because she's mean. But yeah, so he's still got his buddy Korg by his side, and he's got the two screaming goats. But shifting gears somewhat, let's jump to Jane really quickly. I was super surprised they went with the cancer storyline. I'm aware that's her circumstances in the comics, and that's the thing I was talking about earlier where I was like, I wasn't sure if they'd go down that route because I'm like, people are like, there's no way they'd do that because it's supposed to be like, it's like Ragnarok was kind of serious and somewhat depressing in some regards, but you're like, there's no way they'd do the cancer storyline. That'd be too depressing to kind of handle. And it's like, oh no, they super did it. And it seems like it kind of works the way it does in the comics. Basically, every time she became Thor, it would basically get rid of all the chemotherapy, all the radiation from the chemotherapy, and so she'd basically be back to square one every time. But it seems like it's in this. It seems like they handle it in a similar regard, but I mean, maybe it's the exact thing, but they worded it different because in the movie they make it seem more like when she becomes Thor, it weakens her body. Like her body's already in a weakened state, and like charging up and having that much power flow through her. I mean, if she was, because it doesn't seem like it's a human issue. It does seem like it's just because she's in a weakened state, and it just, they never use the exact words of like, oh, it burns out the radiation. It just makes it so that she weakened her body so that when she came back to being Jane again, like her body wasn't strong enough to like fight the cancer. The cancer was kind of winning because her body kept coming back in a weaker state. Now, whether that was necessarily it getting rid of the radiation, who knows? I did like that we did get an appearance from Darcy. I wish her and Thor could have had some scenes together. Maybe in a different cut of the movie they could have. But yeah, I mean, obviously this is our first time seeing Darcy post WandaVision. Would have been interesting to see if she had anything to say about like, well, does the world, well, the world knows about what Wanda did during WandaVision. I think generally speaking, enough people know. But then there's also the situation of like, does she know about everything Wanda did during Multiverse of Madness? That's a whole other thing, but I did think it was kind of neat that Jane's like, hey, this is my book. And she spent the time trying to teach him like how, like, was it wormholes work? And he's like, you destroyed your own book. She's like, yeah, but who cares? You know how wormholes work. And it's like, right, watch the movie. I forgot the first movie she referenced, but she was like, Interstellar actually really gets it, right? Which is a funny thing because I think most people say that about like a lot of the science of Interstellar is kind of current theories about how it kind of works. So it was very realistic in its scientific approach to a lot of stuff, which I think is kind of interesting. But yeah, and she's trying to, and I think it lends itself very nicely to who she is. She is a scientist, so she's kind of like, right, she's trying to find a way to fight back against this. She's trying to find maybe, like, for one, I think it's like she's trying to, it's like, right, when your life is kind of cut short and you have your vision of like, right, I want to change the world, I want to save the world, but now my time is being cut short, and maybe there's an element of, oh, I want to use science to try and fix me, but science isn't working. The thing that she cherishes and loves so much, the thing that like she loves so much, it can't help her in this regard. And she even gets, God, I'm blanking on his character's name. We haven't seen him since Dark World. I mean, it's kind of interesting. Like him and Darcy make small appearances, but like this is the last time we saw both of them movie wise was Dark World. I mean, technically speaking, the same thing for Jane as well. But was it Stellan Skarsgård, Papa Skarsgård? Got a little bit of an appearance from him, but he's like, right, if you need anyone to talk to. And I love that whole thing because Darcy was like, hey, like, you have the, God card that you can play, but like Jane didn't want to. She wanted to kind of handle things on her own. I think just because of the way things ended between her and Thor, which we'll get to in a second. And I think that's just kind of who Jane is. She's very stubborn and like, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to find a way to, fight this. And we kind of found out why. It's like her mom died, whether it was cancer or just being sick. She watched her mom get sick and die. And it's like, right, I made a promise to my mom that I'd keep fighting, so she's going to do whatever she can. So she ended up finding out about, she looked in the book and was like, Mjolnir. And it can heal and stuff. So she ended up going into New Asgard, which I'll talk about that in a second. But I love the whole element of the pieces resonating with her, and I thought that was kind of a neat little element to it. But because I was wondering, like, oh, like, did it just straight up choose her? But we find out there's a little bit more to it. But either way, the pieces started reacting to her like that. I was like, oh, that's interesting that happened. Because I was also wondering too, like, because at least the story, I'm assuming the world knows now because New Asgard puts on a performance of Hela breaking it, which kind of got spoiled because it came out like a while back that Melissa McCarthy was going to be a part of that. And it does seem like it answers the question. This isn't Matt Damon as a playing a role in a play. It's like, no, it sounds like he's playing an Asgardian who is playing the role. So it's like everyone there. So even Melissa McCarthy isn't Melissa McCarthy. That's an Asgardian playing the role of Hela, which I love that whole thing. It's actually a pretty dope stage performance and stuff like that. And I love when he's like spritzing himself on the face to kind of turn to the crowd and squinting himself. I love that so much. I also really appreciate just timing wise. That's just so interesting, and just like how, you know, obviously Luke Hemsworth was one of the people wanting to make a play later on. It's like, oh, to kind of get the spirits of Asgard up, but obviously like Luke Hemsworth is, you know, he plays Stubbs in Westworld, who's also in Westworld, Tessa Thompson. So I was like, oh, that's neat. That's like obviously like because he was in this, spoilers. Well, he was in this week's episode, but Tessa Thompson didn't, you know, as Charlotte didn't pop up. But just interesting how that works out like that. I was like, oh, that's pretty neat. And also it's just like, well, yeah, getting his brother, one of his brothers in there. Hasn't Liam been in one of these or something like that? Maybe I'm being crazy. But either way, I just thought that was kind of pretty neat. Just like, that's also got to be pretty painful because it's like, yeah, it's, well, I mean, to be fair, Thor's not around to watch it, but it's still like, yeah, because it's part of their history and Thor's story. So it's like, yeah, of course they'd, because Loki had it played just because of his egotistical nature. I think they're doing it just in a more inspirational story about like all that Thor went through, all that Asgard has went through, and how it led to where they are now. Either way, I love the endorsement stuff too, where like, because it's like, yeah, it's a tourist trap now, which is kind of weird, but it's like, yeah, that's kind of an interesting way to be like, oh yeah, that's how they sustain that society too. It's like, you know, it becomes like, you know, countries kind of really, some countries really thrive off of, I think it plays a big role in their economy, is being some places being very big touristy place. So I think that kind of helps out New Asgard as kind of a new budding country. But I love that, and also the fact is that Valkyrie has to do like that endorsement. It's Old Spice. I was like, oh, I love it so much. And she's like, oh god, like she has to do that. So I love that. But really quickly, circling back, just, you know, I want to talk about the Thor and Jane situation. I do love that we actually got to see them just kind of being a casual couple. Obviously, because it's a movie, you don't get too much opportunity to see that with everyone. Just them being like, them enjoying movies and enjoying each other's company and having fun and just being wild. But kind of tying that in, we find out why Mjolnir came to her now. So that's interesting that she could piece it back together, but Thor couldn't. I wonder, but it's because it has a special enchantment on it. He didn't, without even realizing it. Back then, he told Mjolnir, like, oh, promise me you'll protect her, you'll look after her. And the moment she came to it, when she needed it most, I think it also, she needed to be worthy, and she was. She's always, I think, always been worthy. And I think in this time when she needs it most, it came to her. I think a combination of all of that led to it making her the mighty Thor. So, it is interesting that, and it's really sad because both of them were so worried. I think that's enough to break up any relationship, when you're kind of like, when you don't really express to the other person your concerns. Like, Thor was scared because for the first time he had something now, you know, this is before he even started losing other stuff. So I'm sure that impacted that too. Like, where he's already going through the phase of like, right, I've been through the situation of I've lost stuff. Like, I mean, he lost stuff while he was with Jane, but even more so upon after Jane. So he broke up with Jane, lost his dad, then lost their home of Asgard. And then they found a new home, but also he ended up losing his brother yet again, and to him for real this time. So, which once again, he's completely unaware of the other Loki that's out and about in the multiverse, the one with the TVA. I guess I almost expected him to make an appearance here and there, because I could have sworn there was talks about him making an appearance. I mean, I guess because of the TVA stuff but this was like well before even the Loki show came out, that he might pop up in the Doctor Strange movie, but never did. Tensions on all that side. But my point was like, right, we kind of get in our heads sometimes about our relationships because it's like, right, you get scared about losing stuff, so you kind of inadvertently kind of make it like, oh, you're going to lose something, and you kind of put up a wall. Both of them did. They kept getting busy, her with work, and pretty much the same, until the point they kind of stopped talking. They start putting up walls around each other. They started kind of making that distance bigger and bigger. They got in fights, and then finally, like, you know, Jane wrote him a note and just left. And you're like, oh, that's heartbreaking. For this all hit him like the rush of emotions when he ran and met her on the battlefield. It's like, whoa, Jane, hey. Oh, that's wild. We actually never got an answer to whether or not Jane got dusted as well. Because I assumed in the trailer they used that scene where she's like, oh, what has it been, like 3-4 years? She's like 8 years and some change. But I'm like, is that because the time skip? Like, maybe that's why I say like 3 or 4 years, because maybe it's only been 3 or 4 years for her because of Infinity War. Maybe she got dusted in that time. But the fact is, for Thor to say 8, they don't make a point of it. But for me, I think it's indicating like him counting like that 5-year time skip too. That's how I interpret that. Because Jane only just recently found out she has cancer. She only found out like 6 months prior. So, but it is that awkward thing of like, oh, I ran into my ex and, oh, you look great, ha ha ha, and just a complex feeling of remembering how everything went down, but also remembering your relationship, and you kind of haven't felt like anything since you lost Jane, and then you also lost so much afterwards. So it's like, it's just a flood of emotions and just kind of mix and matching, and it's like, all at the same time this is all going down, you've also got to deal with the big bad. And honestly, I'm just going to stay on Thor and Jane's relationship. I actually think it actually is a really cute relationship, like how they are around each other, especially because she's trying to figure out catchphrases, and he was like, I forgot what his. It's like, oh, this is going to come to an end. She's like, oh, that's so good. He's like, don't worry, you'll figure one out. And she's like, yeah, you know, this is, first time it's a big guy. He's like, I understand. You never forget your first. And they both kind of look at each other. And she's like, well, I'm going to, kind of go check things out. So it's like them so cute and awkward. Valkyrie being like, oh, look at you two. Oh, looks like you're catching feelings. He's like, well, what? Me and Jane? No. Been there, done that. Kind of got my heart broken. Yeah, we're past that. He's like, don't. And he was almost kind of implying to her, like, don't make a move. She's like, no, I'm not going to. Of course not. We're on the same team. She's like, yeah, Team Jane. It's like, I love Valkyrie teasing him like that. But I think legitimately it is such a sweet dynamic that they have, that it is, especially when he kind of confesses to her about, right, when he got when his clothes got blown off. It's like, right, you were humiliated in front of everyone. He was like, I didn't feel humiliated. I actually felt pretty proud. And Jane was like, oh yeah, I kind of enjoyed the show. Korg's like, oh yeah, that was pretty good too. So like, no one had any problem with what they saw. A few people passed out as well, but yeah, like him confessing to her about, that she's always been that one. She's the one that he loved. And it's like, he'd rather feel that feeling again because he hasn't felt anything since they broke up. And it's like, and she kind of has to drop the C word on him, cancer. He's like, wait, oh my, she's like, yeah. She's like, no. She's like, I'm just kidding. I don't know why I said that. I was like, wow. Because I think for her, she was kind of scared because she's like, right, like she put up her walls before and now he's kind of putting his down, but it's kind of coming at an awkward time because she's now got, because of her being sick now, and he's talking about living to like there is no tomorrow, but even later on, he's like, I meant it until I found out you literally might not have a tomorrow. It changes things. I want us to have a future, but obviously turning into Thor, taps her, even to the point later on, like early on, in fact, when she was in the bathroom, she dropped the hammer and she kind of went back to herself, and you could tell, like, oh, she looked rough, dude. That's just because pretty much, like I said, it's just like the chemo didn't work on her. It's just like her body's just like it puts her in a state like she very rarely dropped the hammer in this. Like, she made a point because it's like, even while she's in Thor, it's still slowly killing her. Because once again, it's not like just, it's a stage 4. She's like, yeah, of what? And Darcy was like, of 4. So it's pretty bad. It's like, yeah, but of what we know. Like, Jane trying to like take a spin on it just because it's her way to kind of like keep fighting. Like, no, like, just because it's stage 4 doesn't mean I can keep fighting. I gotta keep fighting. So... And it seems like Valkyrie knew what was what, but it's like, right, just let's kind of forget about the sync situation. It's like, okay, she's bringing her blades and everything, and it's this. It's like, oh, is that a grenade? It's like, no. Like, it's a music player, and started bumping some Mary J. Blige, and they're both kind of like swinging their head back and forth. I'm like, yeah! I just thought that was so dope. But legitimately, I think especially because this is a relationship where they both kind of are now standing kind of as equals. It's not like, because before, like, she kind of had to play the role like the damsel ship. It's like, no, like, I'm a hero now too. I'm still kind of new at it, trying to figure things out, trying to come up with my catchphrase and stuff. I think I love that about her, because she's like, I was like, I mean, because he's such a lovable doofus, and she's so dorky because of that. It adds this like cute dorkiness to Jane's character, her trying to come up with a catchphrase, like, because she's like trying to play the hero. Yeah, this is what a superhero would say. Like, of course they'd have a catchphrase or something like that. I thought that was super dope. So I really love their relationship, kind of like it rebuilding itself like that. And once again, like, even before they broke up, us getting that chance to just see those small moments between them like that, I thought was actually pretty dope. And, you know, let's shift gears a little bit and shift over into our main antagonist. I thought that was such an Gorr. I kind of went into this knowing a little bit about his background, that basically he starts hunting and killing gods because he looks at gods as selfish bastards, which I'm like, that's such an interesting thing that, I mean, a lot of mythology a lot of things use that mythology of like gods are terrible people. I mean, especially when you like look at some mythology and find out some of the stuff that the gods do, it's kind of super jacked up. But for him, it's like, right, him and his daughter, like, he was taking care of her, she died, and he went to find their god that they worship, and he's like, oh, thank you, now, like, there'll be kind of eternal peace because of this, right? You know, all of our people in my village who worshipped you, they died, my daughter died, but I'm here, so it's all gonna work out. But the guy was such a gluttonous bastard, being like, oh, we're celebrating because we killed that guy who had the necro sword. So I guess in general, the necro sword like calls for the death of gods. It finds people who it feels that darkness and that urge in them, and it's like, we have no idea who that previous guy was, but maybe the sword's been like that for so long, because obviously there's myth and legend about it, but we don't know how to kind of, I don't think they ever went over where it started or where it came from. It's just kind of a thing that is, and I guess it's moved on from person to person to person. And Gorr ended up being its latest person, because it's like, right, his god was even willing to kill him, because he's like, right, you should sacrifice yourself. Like, isn't that kind of what you're for? Because also when he came up eating the fruit, like, oh, look at this dog, like, being so gloaty and stuff like that. And we see that that's not just, I mean, once again, even Thor himself was an arrogant douche. Was he that bad? No. Is even Party Thor from What If that bad? I think Party Thor definitely would have met the end of Gorr's blade and ended up toast. But, you know, our Thor has gone through so much. He's changed. He's been someone, I mean, from a very young age, he's always been about helping people. So I feel like Party Thor would have been the worst. But even Thor at the very beginning of this series, even when he wasn't worthy, still probably a better god than most, it seems. So, but for Gorr, it's like his need, like, it's like, right, I'm gonna free this world of the gods. Like, they're nothing but sitting on their pedestals, just watching people. Like, they're twiddling their thumb while people sacrifice and die for them, and they do nothing to lift a hand or finger for them. So he makes a point of it. But I think that's also mainly the necro sword. Either like it feeds on those dark desires to go after the gods in general. That's why it picks, I guess, the people it does. But nevertheless, I also love the shadow thing of like him kind of bringing shadows alive. Those things kind of remind me, if you've ever played the game Heart of Darkness, it kind of reminds me of those shadow creatures from that to some extent. When he kidnapped the children, I thought in his own twisted way, and maybe there's some element to this, but in the end they were always meant to be bait. But I thought he was kidnapping the children because what happened to his daughter, I thought that's kind of what he was going for. Like, oh, I'm going to kill the gods. I'm kidnapping all their children because you guys don't deserve children. They're going to suffer under your weight. It's like, you guys you can't even take, you know, even retribution of so many other people's children have died. You shouldn't have your children. In fact, I'm actually going to save your children from the massacre. Like, I'll kill all of you. Like, I'm wondering, would he have gone through the trouble killing God? Because some of them were Asgardians, so they're gods as well. So would he have gone through the trouble of eventually coming back to kill them? That's a question, but that's what I thought his initial motive was. But in actuality, it was just to use them as bait. I thought it was kind of interesting making like kind of the head kid Heimdall's kid. So I thought that was interesting. Thor doing his best to try and keep them calm and stuff like that. I even love the one time he was talking to them, telling the story about everything that went down, and what was it? The place where all the gods gathered, and like Valkyrie was like tickling his nose in the middle of that. I thought that was kind of sweet. But let's kind of jump to that really quickly. Once again, playing into the whole, like, gods are kind of douchebags, especially Zeus. That Thor came to him and was like, oh my god, he's my role model. Like, he's all about lightning, I'm thunder. Like, I take a lot of inspiration from that, which is actually kind of cute to know that that's kind of what he pulls from. It's like, you would think your father would be kind of your biggest inspiration, but I guess it's like, right, you're more because you are the literal god of thunder. Your dad's not really that, but you are the god of thunder. He's the god of lightning. So I could definitely see that parallel. So that's also interesting just to think about, like, oh, like one god from a different pantheon looking up to a god from another. I just thought that was interesting. There was also this one god that looked like how Lila looks when she gets her suit at the end of Moon Knight. There's a god that looks like that. Because I think some people are saying, like, because obviously the outfit she get doesn't quite match 100% with the god she was associated with. That whole thing, right? So, either way. There was a god that was there that kind of, reminded me of that. And it kind of also plays into it, like, that probably would be the one place that, Khonshu probably wouldn't be, because we know he's out and about, but it's like, of course he wouldn't be there, just because, like, he doesn't mess with the gods, especially the way the gods kind of didn't listen to him when it came to the whole hero situation. Probably seems like he kind of probably extends that. He's kind of like the loser outsider of the rest of the gods as well, so he probably didn't, like, want to be there as well, because he's busy off of Jake doing their own thing, probably, so. But despite Thor pleading with them, like, no, we need to do this. Which I really like the Valkyrie and Jane. I really wish we could get more time with them being the duo that they are. Because it's like, right, we're going to start, like, knocking heads. And Thor's like, what's up? What's going on with you two? Because, like, they click together so much. Because I love that about, I guess it's almost like becoming Thor kind of flipped her a little bit. I mean, maybe going back, because it's been a while since I rewatched the first Thor in Dark World. So maybe those are still kind of, I mean, those are probably very true to her personality of her being very gun-ho. But now that she has a power too, that's probably making her go like, no, let's bust some heads. I'm like, knock some heads off some shoulders type of situation. But I thought that was so interesting that both her and Valkyrie are like, no, let's go about this. Which I even love, like, really quickly with Valkyrie. The only reason why she's here is like, well, her sisters died, and yeah, being king's fine and everything, but it's more like handling the stuff here and there, stuff that's not really that important. She kind of wants to go out into the field. She wants to go out in battle. She wants to die in battle, because it's like, that's the only way she's going to be reunited with her. She's just looking for, sadly, a battlefield to die on. Kind of very similar to Sif in that regard. I think Jane, to some extent, maybe that's also what bonded them. It's like both of them wanting, like, well, Valkyrie looking for a place to die, Jane knowing that she's going to die, but she wants to do something with that time. Like, I'm not going to spend the rest of my time in, like, a hospital bed. I'm going to go out there, I'm going to do my superhero thing, I'm going to save the day, I'm going to help people, just like I've always wanted to. Like, before I kind of used science to help people, now I'm using space Viking magic to help people. But really quickly, circling back to it, the gods. I thought that was such an once again, like, Zeus just being such a dick and whispering like, hey, like, okay, they're kind of trying to, like, meet Thor halfway to some extent, because he's like, no, and we can't let you go because Gorr might find out. And it's like, oh, are you afraid? And he's like, yeah, I kind of am afraid. That guy could literally kill him. When he tried to justify it, it's like, oh, he gotta kill low tier gods. Who cares? We're safe here. But it's like just staying in their omnipotence, and you know. But Thor had it up to here, and it's just like, no, we're gonna bust some heads. So, which I didn't talk about it. I really love how Jane is able to use Mjolnir like that, like break it to pieces and like have the pieces fly around and then come back together. I'm like, that's actually super dope implementation of that, and I think that's so cool and badass of how that gets used. Korg getting that lightning bolt, I was like, wait, they didn't really just kill Korg. There's no way. I figured like it'd be a joke of like, well, he'll probably rebuild himself, but like I was surprised when Thor snapped and ended like Zeus threw the lightning bolt. Thor grabbed it and shot it through his chest. I was like, they're just going to let you kill Zeus and that going to be, well, to be fair, you bailed immediately. Luckily, Korg's alive. He's like, yeah, my species is fine. It seems like kind of like essentially their hearts are their mouths. It's like, yeah, as long as our face and mouths are intact, we're good. So I was about to say, like, couldn't you just like body rebuild around? But it's like, technically your body's dead and you need to come, I guess, like, well, it seems like he needs time to grow it back, just like, you know, certain animals can like grow back limbs. I guess his body works the same way. I love the whole thing of him being stuck to the back of like Valkyrie tying her hair, and it kind of, if you play the PS4 God of War, now it's also on PC and PS5 if I'm not mistaken, but that God of War, it kind of reminds me of Mimir, like, because he kind of serves a similar purpose, like, oh, behind you, this way, watch out, brother. That he says that type of stuff, so it very much gave me similar vibes of that. But it's like, I love that trio together. I mean, just even with Korg too, like they wreck shop together. But I was kind of like I said, surprised when Thor ended up killing Zeus. I was like, oh, that's interesting. But even he's like, you know, the other gods are probably pissed at us and they'll probably be hunting us for the rest of our lives. It's like, he's probably saying that jokingly, but you're like, probably will have to deal with that in the future. There, you know, a whole bunch of gods. And once again, not knowing Marvel, like, weren't two of the people there when they eventually escaped? Weren't they Celestials? I'm not sure. They look like they could have been Celestials, but I'm not sure. Like, do Celestials even count as gods? They're kind of like gods, but I don't know if they'd be kind of considered that amongst the ranks of the actual gods or not. But I even love that moment Korg had with Valkyrie really quickly, where he's kind of talking about, like, right, she hasn't had love since, like, one of the women, I mean, I think she, amongst her sisters, amongst the other Valkyries, I think she was in love with one of them, is kind of what they're implying. The others were just kind of like sisters to her, but one of them was very important to her, and all of them died. So it's like, yeah, you kind of really haven't found anyone since then, because Korra kind of talked about how his dads got together, and, you know, it's like, oh, like, people hold it, like, oh, like, do you think Thor and Jane will hold their hands and end up having a baby together? And Valkyrie was like, no, sadly I don't think they will, because she knows about how limited Jane's time was. So it's just kind of, and she was kind of saddened by that, you know. An element to this too I really liked was the whole Stormbreaker getting jealous, because I do love that they personified it more and more of him being like, hey, Mjolnir. He's like, hey, oh, sorry, I was over there. Oh, Stormbreaker, yeah, sorry, I was over there like reminiscing with my old weapon. You know, it's just, you know, it's you and me now. Like, that Stormbreaker was obviously getting very temperamental all throughout the movie, just kind of getting a little jealous, because it's not only is your ex around, but your ex weapon's around too, and your ex has your ex weapon, and that's complicated feelings, because Stormbreaker's feeling a certain way and you're feeling a certain way. I thought it was really cute personification stuff that they did with that. But like, also, I was talking about it a little bit earlier, but I do love the action sequences in this. Once again, especially when our trio of Jane, Thor, and Valkyrie kind of get into it. I'm like, against Gorr, and I like how skilled he is, and it's like how he can go toe to toe with each one of them. And I love how creepy he is. I mean, granted, he's getting driven insane by the sword, but he almost has like this, like, he's like, oh, like, because Thor cut off Thanos' head, and Heimdall's son was telling that story, and he's like, oh, really? And he rips the head off of like a snake thing, and he's like, what? I thought you liked this. And he tosses it, and the kids are like, ew, it's screaming. I'm like, God, that's psychotic and crazy. And he's just like, got this like psychotic smile and just laughter about it. It's like, oh, this guy's legitimately insane. And the way he's kind of torturing everybody, the way he's kind of leaning into Valkyrie about how she's kind of alone, and like, right, your sisters, the women in this world that you love most, ended up dying, to the point like it was getting to her, to the point she started shedding a tear. Then he also looks at Jane like, right, you're sick, you see, like, you're dying, we're both in the same boat. The fact of the matter is that, you know, we're both going to get used up by the gods and then kind of tossed aside, you know. And was threatening to kill, especially Jane, if Thor, because he needs the power of the Bifrost to get to eternity, where he can, at the center of the universe, where kind of everything comes together. I think it's kind of supposed to be like the starting point of everything. It's basically a being that will allow you to have one wish, and he wants to use that wish to wipe out all gods in existence. And they have to get to him beforehand, but he still outpowers him. I mean, for one, they have to keep him alive because they need to know where the kids are. Jane's kind of in a weakened state because of everything. Valkyrie got stabbed by him. By the time they get back to Earth, New Asgard, Jane's situation got even worse. And I even love how Gorr is able to use the shadows to his advantage. It's not just summoning monsters. He gets to kind of use them to kind of hide and pull himself out of. There's a particular villain I'm thinking of that it kind of reminds me of, and I just can't quite place what villain that is. Maybe I'm thinking of the Spot, because he might be in my mind just because I know he's going to be in the next Spider-Verse movie. Maybe that's why. Kind of a similar thing to that, just how he can kind of pop in and out. I mean, obviously it's a little different, but it kind of reminds me of that. But an enemy in the shadows. I'm like, well, I mean, there's plenty of horror movies that utilize that, but I do like that they added like a creepy element to him. Especially in that particular area, because all the color like evaporates and it just everything's like grayscale. I'm like, oh, I like that aesthetic choice. I'm curious, would people have an issue with that, because it is a very like these along with the Guardians movies tend to be the most bright, colorful movies. So I wonder, would that be an issue for certain people? I do like how they utilize it where, like, obviously, like, the lightning from, like, the hammer and the axe still glows blue, and that adds color to it, just like the lightning bolt is still, like, yellowish gold. I do like that those tend to be the only things that are actually in color. I was like, oh, I like that from, like, a cinematography standpoint. So to get back to Earth, Jane's situation is getting worse, and if she Thor's up again, it could be bad. But for Thor, it's like, no, I regret it if I never took the chance to see if this between you and I could work again, and I need you to live, so I need you to stay here, let me go handle this, and I will be back, And I love Valkyrie being like, yeah, I think I lost a kidney. Yeah, I'm going to sit this one out, because if I do go, I just get in the way, because you'd have to worry about me. It's like, go get those kids and bring them back. So, lightning bolt in hands, he goes to rescue the kids. And I love that whole sequence that it's like, right, how much of you have battle experience? And none of them did. And it leads to this pretty dope sequence where he's like, all right, I bestowed upon these kids temporary the power of Thor, because everyone had gotten their weapons in hand, and I was like, dude, I love how badass it looks, like the lightning charging all of their eyes and through their weapons, and the little girl with the doll. I was like, oh, I cannot wait to see what that looks like in battle. And then all of them charging like that forward against the shadow monsters. I was like, this is such a hype moment, especially at certain points they're passing weapons back and forth. I'm like, yo, passing the puck, in a metaphorical sense. I was like, that's dope. And the little girl, she basically holds up her doll, her stuffed animal, and it shoots out the laser beams from its eyes. I was like, dude, this is sick. I love that whole sequence. It's just like, that's such a fun little thing. And getting Heimdall's like son to kind of be the one, was it Axel? Because after, right, Guns N' Roses. But I did hit him leading in a charge, and him like, for Asgard. And I was like, dude, them all looking battle ready. I was like, that's such a beautiful and sick sequence. So Thor has to go up against Gorr one-on-one, and Jane shows up. And like her jumping into this because she felt that Thor was in danger, and despite everything, despite what it might cost her, she needs to make sure that this is kind of seen through. We can't let Gorr get his way, even if it costs her life. Even like that point where like the helmet was kind of battle damaged, I was like, oh, that looks sick. But for her to be like, he was calling her Lady Thor, she's like, the name's the Mighty Thor, or if you can't say Mighty Thor, Dr. Jane Foster. I was like, hell yeah. Because typically the character is sometimes referred to as Lady Thor, but I like leaning into that by being like, no, I'm the Mighty Thor. Kind of getting her to some catchphrases out to some extent. And I love how that final sequence went down with breaking the sword, because the sword was broken, but it was coming back together just like Mjolnir. So she took the pieces of Mjolnir, gathered up all the pieces from his blade, and they all came compact together inside of Mjolnir. And then she slams it down and shatters and destroys the pieces inside, destroying the sword as a whole. I was like, that was a beautiful sequence. But the problem is, like, that used up everything Jane had, and it kind of disappears from her, and she's dying in the end. And Thor is begging Gorr. It's like, right, I know what you're feeling. Like, you don't want revenge against a god. Like, that's not what's driving you. Anger, revenge, your love. You're looking for love. You lost the love you had with your daughter. He's like, I'm begging you to find some other way. Like, you could bring her back. Choose love. And he's like, that's what I'm going to do. In whatever time I have left, whatever you decide to do, I'm going to spend it with her, whatever time I have left. And so it's like, right, he's like, but if I bring my daughter back, she'll be alone. And Jane's like, she won't. At first I was like, wait, are you guys going to raise her together? But no. For Jane, it was worth it in the end because she got to be a hero and got to also go out on her own terms. And she got to whisper to Thor what her catchphrase was. She's like, I've been working on it. He's like, that's a good catchphrase, you know? Pretty good for a human, pretty good for a god. And for her to die, like, just when you got her back in your life, to lose her like this, that was actually really heartbreaking. I was like, wow, so they're not, I mean, maybe that's also going to be an issue for some people, that Jane won't be the Thor going forward, like in the regards of, there might exist a mighty Thor later on, but maybe it's going to be in a different form. It won't be Jane Foster, but maybe Gorr's daughter, who Thor is going to be raising now. He brought his daughter back after everything. It's like, right, you know, in the end, like, the sword was already killing him anyway, but it's like, does he deserve to have his happy ending? But it's like, no, like, you know, but in the end, he did choose love, his love for his daughter, especially when he saw Jane dying in Thor's arms. It reminded him of, you know, when his daughter died. So asking Thor to look after his daughter, and I thought that was really sweet. Obviously, Korg. Didn't they say that he met someone named? Didn't he say like The Rock? Because the moment he said no, it was someone he met his love, Dwayne, and I was like, you. At first, I was almost like, I was in the theater. I was like, did I hear that right? Like, as in Dwayne Rock Johnson. It seemed like that's what they were going for. The kids came back home, but immediately Valkyrie's pushing them to train. Sif is training with Heimdall's son. Gorr was stopped. And now him and, I love the little back and forth between Thor. It's like raising a little girl and just kind of her being like, not wanting the pancakes. And it's like, yeah, I'm wearing these shoes. He's like, put on your boots. And he's like, fine, you're going to be uncomfortable and that's going to be on you. She's like, fine, I'll wear the boots. And I'm like, and Korg at the end saying that their team name, I was like, oh, what are they going to be, the Thors? It's like, no, Love and Thunder. I was like, oh, that's super cute. I love that, like her running out with Stormbreaker in hand. I'm like, that's super cute, because some parts of Eternity, like some of those, because she was brought back by Eternity, some of those powers like circled to her, so we don't know what that's going to look like in time, but they could do a lot with that, like either keep her as a little girl or eventually like have her grow older, and very much like the Groot thing of like, oh god, you had to deal with baby Groot, now you're going to have to deal with teenage adolescent Groot, and Thor kind of balancing that out is going to be interesting. Did like the cute additions to Mjolnir and her drawing on it. He's like, no, I like this, because she was like, oh, it looks so boring. So I thought that was kind of a nice touch at the end. It's like, right, them kind of being a superhero team, kind of, you know, it's almost like carrying on that will of Jane, too. It's almost like having her by his side still, because it's like, right, he's carrying on for Jane, she's carrying on for her father, and I thought that was kind of a beautiful thing, a beautiful way to kind of wrap everything up. So, but then we get that stinger at the end. I thought was kind of neat, that the moment Zeus was like, right, they come to me and they ask for a superhero. It's like, right, we gods take second fiddle now. It's like, right, you've been so sitting on your laurels for so long being top dog, now the superheroes are the real heroes. And it's like, right, make them fear us. I was like, oh, so the gods are going to be a bigger threat going forward. Maybe that'll only be a Thor storyline, but maybe not like for the rest of the MCU or not, but we see Zeus is sitting out Hercules, so setting up a future antagonist in that way. I think he's a hero, so maybe there'll be some clashing, and then eventually him and Hercules will work together. We'll see how that works out. But I thought it was kind of interesting finding out that Zeus isn't dead, but maybe he's heavily weakened after taking a shot through the heart like that. But he's top dog god, so it'd probably take a lot more to kind of kill him. Probably the only thing that probably could straight up fully kill him would be Gorr's sword, like the Necro sword, but it's destroyed now, so maybe that's also why he's surviving. It's its own thunderbolt, rather, not lightning bolt, his own thunderbolt, so it kind of makes sense. That probably wouldn't be enough to kill him, but sending his own son, which I'm wondering, is that like kind of like, is this typical lore where Hercules is a demigod, or is he like, is this technically like he's already kind of going through his journey and he's risen to godhood, very, you know, ergo like Disney's Hercules, which they are doing. Apparently, I don't know how true that is, that Disney is doing like a live action Hercules movie, which is kind of interesting considering you have that in the MCU and you've got Zeus and this, and you're potentially going to do a live action remake of that. Either way, I just think that's kind of interesting. But like how he eventually rose to godhood as well in that movie, that's why I'm wondering, like, has this Hercules technically already gone through that or what? Yeah, obviously, we didn't get really much with him except the mission he got sent on by his father. But then we got the very end stinger, which I thought was beautiful, with Jane in Valhalla. I thought the person she was going to meet in Valhalla was going to be Frigg. I thought that's who she was going to run into, but in fact, instead it's Heimdall. It's like, right, thank you for protecting my son, and welcome Jane to Valhalla. So I was like, oh, that's beautiful. I don't know. I don't. It's kind of sad because I wasn't expecting them to bring her into the story just to kill her. I thought they would have had more time to go. Once again, like, because they were introducing her as Mighty Thor, I thought we'd get a lot more of her. So for her to die in this movie was kind of like, whoa. So that was really interesting. So the question then becomes like, well, is there any like undoing that? Will she return from Valhalla, or is this kind of pretty much stuck in? I mean, because it's also nice because it's like, oh, like once again, she's surrounded by the other gods and stuff like that. I'd like to know like how Darcy and Stellan Skarsgård's characters feel about this, because they were the characters that were the closest to her. So losing Jane, but you know, Jane is honored in Valhalla, not only in Valhalla but also like in New Asgard, giving her all, sacrificing herself for others. So once again, I just thought that was kind of a beautiful story all around. It almost fits narratively speaking of like, right, there's so much tragedy, but how do you compensate with tragedy most times? With jokes. So for the movie to kind of blend both of that, you know, both in Ragnarok and this, that's Taika's style, I think, in general, but I think it almost lends itself to this very Shakespearean-ness to it, of just like this tragic comedy. I don't think they mean that literally in that way when they talk Shakespearean tragic comedies, but there's a very tragic like comedy element, you know, to kind of, because that's how I deflect. My way of dealing with things is humor. It's like, yeah, like that's my defense mechanism. So it almost kind of works out like Jane's defense mechanism was, you know, Thor's was kind of like, oh, battle and jokes, whereas Jane's was kind of going into battle as well, kind of like both of them kind of dealing with things full steam ahead, just like kind of fighting like there's no tomorrow, you know. Sadly for Jane, there wasn't, but that's why I'm curious, will there be any undoing that and bringing her back as later, or like I said, because she doesn't refer to, like, because Thor is more like Uncle Thor, not Dad Thor, because she had her dad, so he's like, yeah, sure thing, Uncle Thor. So his new niece, like, is she going to eventually grow and become the new Lady Thor, just kind of a little, I mean, the Mighty Thor, and just kind of shift over from Jane Foster in that regard. So I'm curious if that's the direction they're heading. Obviously, like I said, with the Hercules thing, so we know where things can kind of go for the future of the Thor movies, whatever lies beyond this. Obviously, the conversation has been, because for a lot of people, they felt like Phase 4 has been very aimless. It just kind of feels like everything's so disconnected. At least previous phases, you know where everything was leading up. But I feel like maybe it's in the first phase, but I also feel like that's a little, because it's like, for one, you're starting from scratch in so many regards, so like you're building back up, and there's so many moving pieces, both the new pieces as well as the pieces that have been around that are now being handled in a new direction, like Thor and stuff, that I'm like, I feel like I can understand people's criticism of that, like not knowing the direction things are going fully, but I also feel like it feels, narratively speaking, maybe I would feel like that would be so much like the comics, aren't it? Because like comics sometimes are just kind of like so much their own thing that, yes, it's a connected universe, but I figure people would like more that these movies are not standalone, but yeah, they're in the universe, but they're still kind of their own story and not just 100% like, oh, it's set up for the future, which, yeah, it is, but I don't know. I can understand where people are coming from, and then there's the other side of me that's like, I can't understand where people are coming from, but you know, maybe it's just because I'm in my own little bubble when it comes to this stuff. But I'm very excited to see what happens next. The next movie will be Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, coming out in November. So that's going to be interesting to see what ends up going down in that. Also, just in general, what, you know, will happen in a Thor 5. Like I said, will we see his niece still being a little girl? Will it be Love and Thunder? Love will be still small, or will she be a teenager? Like, how they're going to handle that. It's going to definitely be interesting to see what the future holds, especially what's next for New Asgard in that regard. Obviously, Heimdall's son is going to probably be more of a character because now he's got better control of his powers, and his father's has fully got his father's eyes now. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens going forward. Besides just Hercules, will any of the other gods come after them, or is it just going to be Zeus that has the biggest? He's the one that was kind of taken down and humiliated in front of everybody, all the gods. So that is something to keep in mind. And will this eventually tie into any Moon Knight stuff, because we're dealing with Egyptian gods on that front? Well, so we have to wait and see. But I'm very excited to see what the MCU has in store for us going forward in so many different lanes and in so many different regards. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.